Welcome, baseball fans, to another off-season episode of Dirty Leather. Thank you for joining us for some post-winter meeting baseball talk here at Stadium Rant. This is Doug, the Dugout 2-4, coming at you from Toronto, and I'm joined once again by my fellow Dirty Leather enthusiasts, Jesse, who is kind of celebrating the moment from last week when he perfectly called the move of Pete Alonso, the signing of Pete Alonso with the Baltimore Orioles. So Jesse called that, which was quite impressive. He called it on the show, and the next day it happened. So Jesse, out of Yankees land, and then we've got Khris, who's here with us as well, and he'll be bringing us up to date with what's happening in Boston Red Sox land. And actually, Khris is in Boston as we speak, and he's going to go with his rant and then his segment back to back. So we've got kind of an action-packed evening tonight in terms of baseball talk. Here in Toronto, it's negative 12 degrees Celsius, which is pretty damn chilly. But I've got a drawer full of gummy bears and some fresh baked goods to keep me company here. And I'm ready to talk some baseball. So let's get it going. We can start with our opening rant. As I said, Khris is going to start us off. So go ahead, Khris. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. So my rant sort of goes right into my segment, and it has to do with the Red Sox and sort of how they publicly speak versus what actually happens. And I feel like it's been happening off-season after off-season, where they come out and they say, no, this is the year we're actually going to go out and spend. We don't have a spending cap. We're going to go out and make moves. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then we end up not seeing a whole heck of a lot, or we end up with short-term deals. Or we end up, with trades instead of with signings. We extend our own, which is nice. We've extended a lot of our younger players, which is definitely helpful. We got them locked up for a while. But by and large, we haven't seen them spending a lot. And again, this year, one of the big things that has sort of come out of the front office was like, this was the year that they knew they were there now, and they're going to go out and spend, and they're going to go out and make a splash. They're going to be decisive. They're going to be aggressive. They learned from the trade deadline where they sort of sat back to see if things would come to them, and then ended up missing out on stuff that they wanted, and that they weren't going to let that happen. And we saw that right away with them pulling the trigger on Sonny Gray, and I thought, oh, maybe this is an indicator that is sort of going to change, and granted it is very early in the offseason, but we've seen them miss on a few players that they were in on, because they weren't willing to go the extra couple of years. Now there's reports that maybe they're not willing to go over the 267 cap, and that's part of the issue with the spending that's going on. They're not willing to go beyond potentially even 4 years for anybody that's in their 30s, let alone 5, 6, 7. And it's starting to come out feeling like it's the same thing again. Like it's like how many years in a row can the Red Sox front office pedal this so we just keep falling for it. I feel like, Charlie Brown in the football at some point, it's like, we got to see the actual action. And obviously it takes two to tango, who knows what the reporting is like Pete Alonso, we were way off on that, on years and on money, but who knows, maybe he told them he didn't really want to come to Boston, we don't know all the discussions that are happening with the team. We don't know that it's just the Red Sox, but, at some point the common theme seems to be that we're not willing to do what other teams are willing to do. And at some point that is going to catch up to you. And by and large, I don't disagree with the philosophy. I do think that long-term contracts for players over 30 pretty much never work out by the end. You do end up with an albatross at the end. So I get the logic. And by the same token, you also can't, not make moves ever. You do have to balance that lineup a little bit. You do have to balance that pitching staff a little bit. And sometimes it's going to take, biting into some of those contracts that end up not looking so great by the end in order to put yourself over the edge at the front. And that was something that Dave Dombrowski was willing to do when we won the World Series. That was something Theo was willing to do at the end of the day, and it seems like the current ownership really, I don't know how much of it is Breslow, how much of it was Bloom versus how much of it is ownership dictation, but it seems like that philosophy has changed. And outside of the Sonny Gray trade, which again is a trade, it's not quite the same thing, we seem to be willing to move prospects, but in terms of actual free agency, it seems like it's much of the same, and I'm waiting to see if that's going to change, But as I see infielders dropping off the board, and now the big ties is Kettle Marte, which is fantastic, but also a trade, not a signing. It just seems like it's a lot more of the same, and I'm not sure I'd be burning all their minor league capital that they've worked so hard to rebuild instead of just going out and taking on a contract. So that's sort of what my rant is with the Red Sox. I don't know if anybody has anything to chime in with there before I segue.
I heard a couple of segments with Breslow on MLB Network, and it's interesting that you say that he wasn't very revealing, because I did hear him indicate a couple of times that there was a need at first base, to the point where I almost felt like he was throwing Tristan Casas under the bus a little bit, right? Like that Casas was no longer part of their plan moving forward. And then that kind of reinforced the idea that, well, maybe they're really going after Alonso. And then, of course, Baltimore picked up Alonso. But he did definitely stress that first base was an area of need. Whether that's internal, if they fill that need internally, or now that Alonso's gone to Baltimore, you got Ryan Mountcastle, I think, who is a free agent, right? Is he not a free agent?
He is not a free agent.
He's not a free agent. So you've got a first baseman there that inevitably, that's a trade piece for Baltimore, right? So maybe, perhaps he could be on his way to Baltimore. But that's the one area of need that Breslow stressed, that I heard him stress, but not much beyond that. So I think your point is definitely valid. But they need a first baseman, and it sounds definitely like go out and get one.
I agree with that. And I think the other biggest need, and why it's sort of frustrating, because I don't particularly love the whole profile of Pete Alonso. I love his power, obviously. I think everybody does, but he doesn't bring a lot else. Defensively, he isn't fantastic. He does have a relatively low batting average. But he does. Yes, that is true. And he does have some power. But I think that's the other thing that the Red Sox really need, is they don't have that. I mean, maybe Roman Anthony will be this year. Obviously we only saw a partial year with him, and he ended up getting hurt. So maybe over the course of the year he'll be that 40, 45 home run hitter that we need. But that's really, even when we had Nevers, something we've been lacking ever since Ortiz. Quite frankly, we haven't really had. I mean, Mookie sort of, but even he, when he was with the Red Sox, was a little bit of an all-around guy. He wasn't purely a power type hitter, and I think that's something that this lineup especially could use to balance out, and that's something we sort of missed out on both Schwarber and, Pete Alonso, and you really don't see much else out there, as far as possibilities to fill that need, so that's
is there a sense of the Netflix curse a little bit? Because I mean, the players that they profiled in that 4-part series or whatever it was, Tyler O'Neill gone, Jarren Duran is now in trade talks. I hear his name mentioned in so many trade talks. And of course Casas was deeply profiled in that as well. Has anyone ever made a connection to that program or that series and players who are featured? No?
It's interesting. I haven't necessarily heard it. It's more just, oh my God, this is the Red Sox, more than that it's a Netflix feature in particular. But it is an interesting thought. I do.
Sorry, I lost you on that last point. You there, Jesse?
Yes, I am. I'm just waiting. I wasn't sure if Khris was coming back, because I saw him talking and he wasn't. No
problem. I was just. I mean, I was loosely making a connection there because I had thought about that the other day, because they did deeply profile those three players as being sort of integral of in the Red Sox future. Now O'Neill was playing for a contract, so I mean, fair enough, he could have moved on. However, Jarren Duran, I mean, he's come up through the organization, as has Casas, and now both of their names are not really connected. I mean, from my perspective, with their core plan. I could be wrong. That could just be an observation. But they're certainly shopping around, like I said, for a first baseman and perhaps for an outfielder as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And that sort of gets into, what I was going to talk about with the Red Sox plan moving forward too, and sort of outline what I was going to, discuss, is Duran does seem like to be the primary trade chip. And it makes sense. We have a plethora of outfielders right now, right? We have Willie Abreu. We have Cedar Rafaela. We have Jaron Duran. We have Roman Anthony. And now they've come out and basically said they only see Christian Campbell as an outfielder. They don't see him as an infielder anymore. They only see him as an outfielder. And we got him locked up to a long-term contract last year. So realistically, you're looking at 5 outfielders, not even including Yoshida, who's stuck at the DH essentially right now. It would make sense. He's the worst defensively of the group, but he's also an outfielder as opposed to an infielder. So realistically, you've got 6 major league caliber, outfielders for 3 to 4 spots. Something's got to give. And we already saw them move Joe Stinks and Garcia in a trade, mainly because there just was never going to be a place for him to play unless everybody got hurt, so it made sense to sort of move him as a piece of depth,
what about Adolis Garcia? Is that name being floated around at all? Adolis Garcia?
Yeah, I haven't heard much about him, but that would be interesting. Because he's got that power.
He's a decent outfielder as well. I've always thought he was a decent outfielder.
Yeah, he's got a good. He's a decent outfielder for sure. But what I would say is, for Duran's sake, I think part of the reason they haven't lined up on a trade with him either is I think they're still viewing him as 2024 Duran. The 6.5 WAR player, and they're trying to get that value back, and that's why they're shopping him the most. I think they actually see him as the most potential return for a fairly equivalent trade-off, moving Roman Anthony into there full time, if not, getting an improvement there, but other teams are viewing him as 2025 Duran, the 4 WAR player at best, and so they're not aligning with that value. But I think that's why he's the one being shopped. And I think, truthfully, he has to be shopped. And in fact, my plan, I think, would be to be moving Duran 100% in a trade, potentially for a little bit more pitching. And my other plan is, so I think personally, it seems to me, based on the way the Red Sox have been talking, that they only want one infielder, most likely. Because they see, obviously, Marcelo Mayer is ready to go also, and they want to insert him into that lineup somehow. And so right now, if you look at the infield, you've got Cassis at first base, you've got nobody really at second base, you've got Story at shortstop, and you've got Mayer at third base, technically. Or you could shift Mayer to second base if you brought back Bregman.
That's not ideal. Because the plan was the plan was to have Mayer at short, was it not?
It was, but they talked about him potentially being the third baseman moving forward, and that they're comfortable entering the season with him at third base if that's what ended up happening, which could just be some leverage for Bregman, who seems to not be getting nearly the offense he thought he would again, and they may be trying to play another long game with him and get him on a relatively team-friendly deal like they did last year. So that some of that just could be posturing too. You know what I mean? I'm not sure.
I don't think any team signing Bregman beyond 4 years.
No, I agree.
Why would
just
go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of chime in on that. There's been very little talk about Bregman outside of Boston, for a lack of better terms. You didn't really see his name pop up in the winter meetings. There's been very little interest, and there's been reports that he is getting nowhere close to the 40 million AAV that he was looking for. It's more than likely going to be 20 to 25 million. So there's a good chance he could probably wind right back with Boston on a much cheaper deal. So that might, complicate matters as well with Marcelo Mayer. Do you bump him to second? Do you move Trevor Story to second and put Mayer at shortstop? What do you do about first base? Do you try to maybe target Ryan O'Hearn, who's still out there? Do you try to target Murakami, who's a third baseman but plays first base as well? So there's a lot of questions about the Red Sox roster construction. And I personally, what would be very interesting is if they take one of those outfielders, and this is a far-fetched theory, they take one of those outfielders and try to teach them first base. That might be very interesting. I don't see that happening. They might just go with the cheap option in Ryan O'Hearn or Murakami if they're able to do so on the last day that he's posted. But there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of trade pieces here that could be moved for Boston. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and Cassis has got to.
I agree.
Cassis has got to underperform miserably for them to explore those options, right? Because they're going to give him every opportunity to earn that starting first base role. I'm pulling for the guy. I like Tristan Cassis. I think he's got that just innate power hitting ability. He's a power hitter, right? But he just has not shown it up to expectation so far. So anyway.
Yeah. So I guess I would just wrap up with sort of my philosophy as far as the Red Sox goes. I think they should be going for two infielders, not just one. And I think that I would love to see Kettle Marte be one of those two. But I don't know what the trade would cost for him. And I think they need one more starting pitcher. Ideally a front of the line starting pitcher. My thought process was using an outfielder, whether that be Duran or even potentially Abreu, with the Brewers in a package to go get Freddie Peralta. I think would be a perfect for what the Red Sox have already built there. But I don't know whether they do it. It sounds to me like they have discussed Freddie Peralta with them and that they've asked for a lot more than the Red Sox are willing to give. But we'll see how that goes as the offseason plays out. But that's sort of my game plan. Yeah,
it's Crochet 1, Gray 2, or is Bayo still 2?
I think as of right now it would go Crochet 1, Sonny Gray 2, Bray and Bayo 3. I think you'd end up with probably Johan Oviedo in that rotation to start at 4, and you'd probably get Connolly early in that 5 with Peyton Toll starting in AAA to start the season. That's my guess if the season was to start today. Yeah.
All right. Jesse, you want to follow up on your rant? Or?
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So my rant to start this week is not necessarily oriented on the Yankees. That will be later in the show, but it's mainly just about the winter meetings this year. I was actually a little underwhelmed, unfortunately. Now there were a couple of signings that were quite large. Again, Alonso to the Orioles and Schwarber actually going back to Philadelphia were two of the larger signings during that winter meetings period, including, and also Edwin Diaz to the Dodgers, which we'll get into shortly as well. But there wasn't like a huge mega deal that really blew everybody away. Now, you could argue that, yes, Schwarber going back to Philadelphia was not really anticipated. I was expecting Schwarber to leave for greener pastures somewhere else. And I was probably thinking maybe, he does go back to the Reds, goes back to the hometown, maybe goes to another team that's looking for a DH spot, maybe San Diego, because they might be losing Ryan O'Hearn. But that was, again, relatively large. I didn't really see a lot of excitement, however. Now, again, it's just from an outsider point of perspective. I wasn't there at the winter meetings. I wish I was. But there didn't seem to be a lot of excitement with regards to that, especially on the pitching market. The starting pitching market has been moving like an ice glacier, for lack of better terms. It's not been moving very fast outside of Dylan Cease when he signed with the Blue Jays a week or two ago. Now, again, it can be slow during the offseason, especially near Christmas time. Maybe most people's thoughts are not on baseball. The players' thoughts are not on baseball, not thinking about deals right now. But it just feels like it's moving quite slow this year. Again, especially with the starting pitcher market and so much with the third base market, with Murakami still there and Bregman still out there, like we just discussed. Now, the question is, why is this happening? Could it be a weak pool because there's not really a huge headliner? But you can make the argument that, yes, Schwarber, Alonso, Bregman, a bunch of other starting pitchers are not necessarily weak. But again, there's no drop-dead free agent out there that's garnering everybody's interest outside of maybe Bellinger and Tucker for the outfield. Could it be possibly because of the looming lockout like we saw in probably late 2020, early 2021? I discussed this last week, where I believe that the market was not moving as slow as we saw the first time around last 5 years ago with that initial lockout back in 2021. Maybe that's possibly the case. Maybe they're a little skeptical with, how the game's going to progress, how that discussion's going to go. We'll see what happens again with regards to that. But that's another explanation. Could it be just a lack of demands from most teams? Yes, that's a great, I guess you could say that's a great example or a great point to make. It doesn't seem like that there's a lot of demand from most teams to really fill out their roster with star-studded players. The Yankees have been, and we'll get to the Yankees in a second in more detail, but the Yankees really haven't seen very keen to move very fast on the market. The Mets are a very questionable team right now. You haven't seen a lot of movement outside of, some of the usual suspects. Again, the Dodgers making that signing of Edwin Diaz. The Orioles, again, making that contract for Alonso. The Braves signing Robert Suarez to their bullpen to help with Raisel Iglesias in there. So it seems like that there might be just some signings here and there. So there doesn't seem like that there's a lack of demand just yet. Now, are teams playing the waiting game? That's probably the biggest example. That's probably the reason why this market's moving so slow. Teams are really wanting to get the cheapest deal possible to get the best player possible. Again, prime example, and I've said this before, Alex Bregman was asking for about $40 million AAV, which is extremely high, given his, now again, does he deserve it? You can make an argument. Very good third baseman, great defense, great bat, so on and so forth. But is he really worth $40 million? Most executives would say no, or most fans would say no. So most teams are just waiting to see if that price comes down to probably $25-30 million, maybe less than that to $20 to $25 million. But it seems like a lot of teams are just wanting these contracts, these sky-high offers or these sky-high demands from these players to come down at least somewhat. Because, again, you're seeing the same thing with the Yankees and Bellinger. Bellinger's asking for 7 years, and the Yankees are standing firm at 5 years, according to reports. So it really is a waiting game with regards to that. So that's my rant. It just seems like that the winter meetings this year were kind of dull outside of a couple of signings. But probably when we get into January, we'll see the market really heat up and see some of these big name free agents come off the board.
Yeah, I mean, you're not alone in thinking that. The free agent class this year really is not all that great. I mean, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was supposed to headline this free agent class, right? And the Blue Jays were proactive in getting him off the board. And now the premier names are Schwarber, right? You've got Schwarber who already signed. And then you got Tucker. But those guys, I don't believe, are even top 20 WAR for overall players. So, I mean, they're not elite players. So you're entering like kind of dangerous territories because you've got guys that are not headline names. I mean, Schwarber's going to go out and hit 50 some odd home runs, but he's also going to hit 210, right? And, so they're one-dimensional for the most part, and they're signing deals where the AAV is like exceeds 30 million and it's hovering around 40 million. And that's not good for the game, because what happens when a guy like Skubal, renews? Because his name is now being floated around for as a possible trade to a number of teams, mainly the Dodgers, but that's contingent on an extension, right? So what is that going to do? What is that going to do to the free agent market? He's going to sign for what, like 45 million AAV? He's just going to absolutely blow the bank, and that's just going to elevate everything else. I don't think there's any way that Bregman is going to sign for between 20 and 25 AAV, even though certainly that's what he probably deserves. And Bichette is probably going to go to the highest bidder, and he's going to be over 30 million from the sounds of it. So you're going to have Tucker between 30 and 35 AAV, Bichette around 30, and then probably Bregman in the high 20s, right? And that's crazy. That's crazy talk, right? So where is the ceiling with all this? So we're just entering a danger zone, and that's that's where they're headed. They're headed towards some troubling times in terms of collective bargaining with the union and MLB, and that's coming up. Well, I guess it's not going to happen this year, but it'll happen probably after this season, right?
Yes.
So it seems to me like some teams are just scrambling to scoop these guys up who are potentially going to be free agents next year. Number one being Skubal, right? So my rant, I agree with you. Like the free agent class really isn't all that great. Even like the advertising, like you look at the winter meetings, and I found this kind of funny because you've got front and center here, Ketel Marte. He's not a free agent.
No, he is not.
Ketel Marte come into the conversation. Freddie Peralta, he's not a free agent. And then you got Mirakawi, who knows what's going to happen with him. So you got Valdez, Framber Valdez, who among the pitchers who are left in the free agent market is probably 1 or 1-2 with Ranger Suarez. Like you can kind of like interchangeably choose one of those guys. I'd probably go with Suarez actually at this point. And then Tucker being the headline of the position players. But like you said, Jesse, really not a deep free agent class at all. So, I mean, that said, it's still always interesting to follow the winter meetings. And like Khris was saying, these GMs, man, they become politicians at these meetings. Like they don't reveal anything. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, Khris said Breslow was very unrevealing and didn't budge in terms of any direction that he thought the club was heading. I thought Breslow was actually the most revealing of the GMs that I heard. Ross Atkins, I mean, at least Breslow was willing to talk about first base as being an area of need. Ross Atkins, the Blue Jays GM, didn't talk about any area of need. And he was pressed by reporters. And he said, well, what about, the closer role? Are you going to go after some of the names that are out there? Like Iglesias was on the board at that point, and Robert Suarez. And Atkins backtracked and said, no, we're happy with Jeff Hoffman. He's our guy. You ask anyone in the clubhouse, like we're all behind Hoffman. He's our closer, right? So then I think, really, like you're not going to go after anybody? Like it's okay. Like you can say like we're looking for another high leverage reliever to take some of the pressure off Hoffman, right? And then lo and behold, a couple of days later, they went out and got Tyler Rogers, highly effective, high leverage reliever. That It's kind of funny. He's got the lowest release point of any MLB pitcher, and they've also got the guy with the highest release point of any MLB pitcher in Trey Savage. And there's an interesting Twitter video that's going around right now where you can compare and contrast the two release points, and it's quite remarkable. It's really like 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock difference, right, in terms of the release. So it's pretty interesting. And then they went out and got Chase Lee, who was another leverage reliever. So I mean, Atkins didn't give away anything, but none of these guys really did in the winter meetings interviews. And there was so much buildup, we really were in terms of guys that are, on the fringe of sports media, like we want to write about this kind of stuff. We're looking for little tidbits of information, and they just don't come our way. Yeah. So we're left to speculate and guess, which you did, Jesse, and you were spot on with your guess. So well done with that. That was pretty impressive. So yeah, good job on the rants. Anything more to add on any of those points?
I don't have anything else to add. I think we're ready to move on to our next segment.
Yeah. So really, the big news coming out. I mean, there were moves certainly, and there were various transactions and signings and trades that were made. We can talk about them. I mean, we don't have time to go through every club, so we kind of picked and chose which club we would like to represent tonight. And of course, I'm going to represent the Blue Jays, and Jesse, as always, is going to represent the Yanks. But then we picked another club additionally and see if there's any, implications or any connections between the two clubs, because, it could be kind of an interesting discussion in its own right. So go ahead, Jesse, if you want to start with anything that you noticed with the Yankees, as well as your additional club that you chose.
Right. So just starting off with the Yankees on my segment, the Yankees have been relatively quiet this offseason, for lack of better terms. Now, to start off, they have bought some players back. They did bring Ryan Yarbrough back. They did bring back Tim Hill. They also are bringing back Ahmed Rosario, a couple of very small pieces from their 2025 roster that, ended up in the division series and lost to the Toronto Blue Jays. So you haven't seen a lot of movement in terms of grand scale signings that the Yankees are used to doing at least, once per offseason. Now, the reason why is because they are focused, and I alluded to this a couple of minutes ago, they are really trying to lock down a contract and really trying to lock in to get Cody Bellinger back on their team, because Cody Bellinger was the second best hitter essentially in terms of WAR. Now, WAR, of course, people will argue is either a useless stat or might not be fairly calculated, so on and so forth. But his production cannot really be dismissed, essentially. He had a 272 batting average, a 334 OBP, and an 813 OPS overall with 29 home runs and 98 RBIs. Now, you can say that some of those numbers were boosted because he plays in Yankee Stadium now, or he played in Yankee Stadium for 2025. And of course, you got the short porch out there. But at the same time, you also have to consider the following. The Yankees offense is not really good outside of Aaron Judge and Cody Bellinger. Yes, you have Jazz Chisholm Jr. at second base, who has now been the subject of trade talks. Yes, you have Ben Rice, who might move over to the first base with Paul Goldschmidt going in free agency. Yes, you have Trent Grisham coming back for that qualifying offer worth $22.5 million, which Yankee fans were extremely frustrated about, and I completely understand why. But if you take Cody Bellinger out of that lineup, that no longer becomes a 90-plus win team. That becomes more of an 85 to 87 win type of team. That's not going to get you into the postseason. That's not going to get you anywhere in the American League East, especially with the Blue Jays and Orioles both making moves, and possibly the Red Sox making some larger moves later in the offseason. It's a very active division in the offseason and during the season. So the Yankees are really slow walking this. They are really, really taking their time with Cody Bellinger. Now, I did write an article for Stadium Rant about a day or two ago. I still believe that Cody Bellinger will re-sign with the Yankees, mainly due to the fact that he had his essentially his best season since 2019 with the Yankees. You can argue that 2023 was maybe a slightly better year with the Cubs, but he looked really comfortable with the Yankees. And I think the Yankees are going to dish out whatever they can to secure Cody Bellinger, because I do believe they know that if Bellinger walks, the onus now falls on Judge even more. And Judge he's getting up there in age. He's going to be 34 next year. So the clock's starting to run, or if it's already running, essentially. The question is, how long does Judge have left? So I'm not really pleased with the Yankees.
He's got 500 home runs in his system. I think we'll both agree on that.
Absolutely. I think 500 is definitely in play. But the question is, what happens if he falls off? What happens if he gets injured? What happens if his play declines? Who's the fallback guy? Is it going to be Stanton, who's going to be 36 next year? Is it going to be possibly Jason Dominguez? Yep.
There's another chase for 500 home runs, right? So the Yankees they value their milestones, right? So yes. Stanton is going to chase that number. Will he get there this year? Unlikely. But they're going to give him as much playing time as possible so he can get 30 or 40, so that next year, once he gets past that milestone, then they can look, that'll give them more leverage to move him. Really, they can move him at that point, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
I think it's important that he gets those 500 home runs in a Yankee uniform. It's not just for him. That's important for, like, these guys want to be in Monument Park, right? There is a legacy attached to their career as a Yankee, and that's super, super important. Otherwise, any other team would have moved Stanton, with the contract.
Yes, definitely. Again, the Yankees are really, really also trying to squeeze whatever they can out of Giancarlo Stanton. Again, I remember when he first came to the Yankees, he was not relatively good. He had some really bad games. He had golden sombrero after golden sombrero, and then he really turned it on later in the year. He's kind of on and up, but I still believe he will more than likely hit 500 home runs and will likely be in stride in Monument Park. Now, on their pitching side, just really quickly, I believed earlier in the offseason that the Yankees would pursue Tatsuya Imai and then get him. I no longer believe that to be the case. Why? Well, they're taking so much time with regards to Cody Bellinger that the clock is running out on Tatsuya Imai's a posting window. It's 45 days. I believe he was posted last month. So the clock is already halfway gone, if not a little bit more than halfway gone. And don't forget, they will have Rodon coming back. They will have Garrett Cole coming back. They still have Max Fried. They have a burgeoning ace in Cam Schlittler. They still do need to fit that number 5 slot. That could likely be Will Warren. That could likely be Luis Gil. That could easily be maybe Ryan Yarbrough if they try to reconvert him into a starter, or possibly an opener if they want to, or they can go into AAA and select the next best pitcher. So there's really not a lot of room to move for the Yankees, but the number one thing that they absolutely have to do is get Cody Bellinger back on this team. If Cody Bellinger walks, then you're likely going to have to pivot to Kyle Tucker. So, and Kyle Tucker's market is arguably a little bit more hot than Cody Bellinger. So you would likely have to compete with the Mets. You'd likely have to compete with the Cubs again. You would likely have to compete with the San Francisco Giants as a potential dark horse, and maybe even a reunion with the Houston Astros is not out of the question. So you really have to make sure that you either lock in one of those two, because if you don't, your team loses an extra 7 to 8 games next year and misses the playoffs entirely in a crowded AL East. But that's me for the Yankees, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I guess are you in play for Skubal, do you think, or is that trade only with the Dodgers? Because I only seem to hear the Dodgers being floated around as his destination point. For a little while, the Yankees seem to be in play for a trade with Skubal. We talked about that on, I think, our previous episode, or maybe the episode before that. But is there any more talk about Skubal potentially being a Yankee?
So there hasn't really been a lot of talk, and there's been, for one major reason, the future contract implications. So the Yankees have a lot of long-term contracts. You still have Aaron Judge's contract for a couple more years at $40 million AAV, which was well-deserved at the time he signed. You still have Giancarlo Stanton's mammoth contract for the next 2 to 3 years. You still have Max Fried's $30 million plus AAV contract for the next 4 to 5 years, maybe even 6 years. And you still have Carlos Rodon's contract that's worth $25 to $30 million AAV for the next 3 to 4 years. And don't forget, you still have, unfortunately, there's not a lot of room to move. And if you do get Tariq Skubal, you're going to have to argue with the free agency market within a year or two, well, especially within a year.
Yeah, unless you get an extension. And then I think the extension would involve a lot of deferred money, similar to what so many of these contracts are structured with nowadays. That's going to be another issue that comes to the forefront with collective bargaining, no doubt. But wherever Skubal goes, it's going to involve a contract extension. I believe that 100%. If he goes to the Dodgers,
absolutely.
I don't know who the Dodgers are going to give up, but it would have to be, somebody who's major league ready. Josue DePaula is their number one prospect. They're really high on him, but I would have to think that they would probably have to give him up in order to get Skubal, because they don't really have anybody else in the top 100, and it's going to have to be a top-notch prospect to get him, as well as somebody who's probably on a major league roster right now, right?
Well, the other thing that the Dodgers can use just really quickly is they can use some of their starting pitching as well. Don't forget, they have a lot of starting pitchers on that team. They do have Tyler Glasnow. They still have Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They still have Emmett Sheehan. They still have a lot of guys that could be converted into stars. And one prospect's name that could be involved in the trade for Skubal between the Dodgers and the Tigers is Jackson Ferris. He's expected to come up possibly next year. Now, he is a double-A prospect. He has not pitched past that level, but he was relatively good in Tulsa last year with a 10-7 record, 3.86 ERA, and a 1.46 WHIP, which was a little high, but his home run rate was relatively low, and his average rate was still around the 2.45 mark. So there is room for improvement, but if the Tigers really want pitching that they can rely on within the next 2 years, Jackson Ferris might be moving, and Emmett Sheehan might be on the move, and maybe even a starting pitcher that's already established, maybe Tyler Glasnow if they want to move and then shuffle around a couple of players. So it's not out of the question. I would definitely see Jose DePaula being moved, Jackson Ferris being moved, possibly an infielder being moved, or another outfielder being moved, and Eduardo Quintero or Zaire Hope.
I can't see them moving like Teoscar. I can't see them moving Teoscar or any of the veteran big contracts in a move like that. That's not really what the Tigers are about. So it will be a young prospect and most likely somebody, in their top 100, right? I feel for the Tigers fans though. I really do, man. If they lose Skubal, they've lost their main man, and they're right. I would think they're probably going to drop out of contention in that AL Central for a little while, but then they've got Jackson Jobe, who's got serious stuff lying in wait as their ace of the future. So you lose one, you gain an ace. Detroit's always about having that frontline starter. The Tigers have always had that number one guy, right? And I think Jackson Jobe is going to carry them in that role once Skubal leaves. But there's going to be a period of transition that's going to be really difficult for that fan base if and when he goes, no doubt. So, Yeah, so I guess the Blue Jays, well, I mean, their major move was, of course, the signing of Dylan Cease. They kind of had to do that because of the back end of their rotation. Chris Bassett is a free agent. There's apparently a few teams that are interested in him. The Jays talked about potentially bringing him back for 1 year contract. I think at his age, he's probably looking for a 2-year deal or 3 if a team out there is willing to give him that. I think a team like Baltimore, who's in dire need of a seasoned veteran, someone who can lead a staff. Chris Bassett has that and then some. He's a workhorse. Even at the age of 37, he'll still log 180 innings and 32 starts without question. So, and with the Blue Jays,
Yeah.
I don't know if he would really take on that role the way that this rotation is looking to be configured. So he might, take on a 1-year role in relief. So he's a proud guy. I don't know if he'd be willing to do that. Even if the Blue Jays, were stacked and looking towards making another World Series run, I still think his role and his pride rests in being an MLB starting pitcher. And there'll be a number of teams that'll be offering him a 2 or 3-year deal. The Yankees might even be one, right? I'm sure the Yankees probably have some interest in Chris Bassett. So unlikely that he's coming back. Max Scherzer, very unlikely that he's coming back, even though he still speaks of the Blue Jays in present tense in interviews. I've heard him in a couple of podcasts, and he's not speaking in past tense. So I think, he's optimistic that maybe they'll take a chance on him for another 1-year deal. That'd be kind of cool. That'd be cool for our fan base. They signed Dylan Cease, one of the frontline names. I think we both agree Dylan Cease was definitely a frontline starter in this free agent class. And they stepped up as soon as the Red Sox went out and traded for Sonny Gray, which was a bold move. The Blue Jays responded the next day and signed Dylan Cease to a 5-year deal that's well in excess of 30 mil AAV. Is he worth that? Well, I think he is. I mean, Dylan Cease is a strikeout machine. He'll log 32 starts. He'll log, close to 180 innings for sure. His fastball, his metrics read at the top of ahead of anybody, really, the last 4 or 5 years. So outstanding starting pitcher. Probably won't be our ace right out of the gate, but John Schneider and Pete Walker, the pitching coach, have both indicated that they think that there's more in the tank for Dylan Cease and that he hasn't hit his ceiling yet, and which would be amazing to see because his numbers have been pretty awesome up until now. I mean, not his wins and losses don't really indicate that, and at times his walk rate has been a bit high, but in terms of being a strikeout machine and just being an intimidating power pitcher, he has always been that, whether with the White Sox or with the Padres. And then they picked up Cody Ponce, which I think we alluded to briefly in the last 2 episodes ago. He originally came up in the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, was somewhat effective, went over to Japan, was more effective in Japan, and then went to the KPB and was the Cy Young, their equivalent of the Cy Young, and the MVP of the league with a record of like 17-2. But more importantly, he had a whip that was like 0.8 or something. So minuscule walk hits per innings pitch. So that tells us, I'm sure it told the scouting department, Andrew Tinish, my old university buddy, who's the international scouting director for the Jays. I think he scouted Cody Ponce thoroughly and determined that his metrics read that he would have success again with a return to the MLB level. So he's going to give the Jays are going to give him every opportunity to be at the back end of that rotation. So with 4 guys, with Gausman, Bieber, and then you've got Cease, Gausman, Bieber, Cease, and then Barrios, or you got Ponce, and then Barrios, and then Eric Lauer. Am I missing somebody? Might be missing somebody. Anyway, that's like a 5-man rotation there, right? Oh, sorry, Trey Savage, of course.
Yes.
Trey Savage. So you've got like 6 guys, that are fighting for a 5-person pitching staff. I've thought in the past it'd be kind of healthy for teams to go with a 6-man rotation, but realistically that never happens. You might get the odd spot start, or in the dog days of August, you might get the 5-man rotation expand to a 6 for a couple of weeks. But for the most part, every team goes with a consistent 5-man rotation. And the Jays are going to have serious competition for those 5 slots. So, yeah, it looks like the top four with Gosman, Bieber, and Cease and Yasavage. Those are definitely the top 4. And then 5 will be a competition between Ponce and Barrios. And it looks like so far they're leaning towards Ponce having that role, which leaves questions surrounding Jose Barrios and whether he could possibly be a trade piece as well. And then with the free agency, are they going to go after Bichette? There seems to be less talk of the Blue Jays really making any firm offers. Again, the GM Ross Atkins would not budge when pressed with those questions about Bo Bichette. He said that, they're thankful of everything he's brought to the organization. They love Bo Bichette, but really didn't delve into anything further.
Yes.
When pressed about Kyle Tucker, he didn't budge at all. So we do know that Tucker visited the spring training facility, but that's only like a 45-minute drive from his residence in Tampa. So we can't read too deeply into that. But they have had conversations with Tucker. There's no question there. So it would seem that if they're willing to spend, in excess of a 30 to 35 AAV, if that's what they're willing to spend on a free agent, then probably the guy they're going after would be Tucker, because they're not offering Bichette over $30 million AAV. I would highly doubt, and I would highly doubt any team is. Yep. So, I guess our second team, if you had another team that you wanted to speak to, Jesse, or did you have
Yes,
one?
I did. Yes, I did. I did have another team, and that team is going to be the Baltimore Orioles, which I discussed briefly last week and then briefly earlier in this show. Now, again, as Doug alluded to, I said last week that Pete Alonso would likely end up with the Baltimore Orioles because they were in a very good position to get a powerhouse slugger. I did not expect him to get Kyle Schwarber, but I was expecting him to get Pete Alonso because Ryan Mountcastle will likely be leaving or being traded during this offseason. And lo and behold, 2 days later, a day later, the Orioles announced that they had signed Pete Alonso to a very large contract. It was about 5 years, $155 million. So they did get a big power bat for their lineup, which is very important because none of their players last year in their lineup hit over 20 home runs, which is amazing when you think about the amount of talent they have and the potential they have on the team. They have Gunnar Henderson. They have Adley Rutschman behind the plate, even though he was injured last year. They had Ramon Laureano, who was actually pretty good until he was traded to the Padres. They still have Jackson Holliday, who hit 17 home runs. They have Colton Cowser, who hit 16 home runs in 92 games. They had Jordan Westberg, who hit 17 home runs in 85 games. So they get a big power bat for the first base position, which I believe is a big power position. First base is always a power position. That's where you really put one of your heavier hitters. So that's a really big gain for them.
What about Ward? I guess Ward as well. Is Ward hitting in front of Alonso or behind?
Actually, he would, according to Fangraphs, he would be hitting in the 6th slot. Pete Alonso would be hitting in the cleanup spot because they would likely put Adley Rutschman, who's a switch hitter, in the 5th spot behind Holliday, Westberg, Henderson, which would be a left-right build up for the first 4, and then you put a switch hitter on the 5 spot. That's what Fangraphs is saying. Makes sense, but we'll see exactly what the new manager will have in store for that for the team. But yes, Ward will be hitting somewhere in the middle of the lineup. And that's also a pretty big pickup because Ward actually does have really good tools when he is at the plate. Now, the Orioles only had to give up one player. That was Grayson Rodriguez, who was coming off of an elbow injury and reconstructive surgery on that elbow to a certain degree. Not a UCL injury, but essentially just a couple of issues with maybe some bone spurs, so on and so forth. But they decided to send him off to the Angels for Taylor Ward. Now, I believe that the improvements to their lineup essentially are done. I don't think they're going to get any more bats, but I still believe they will have at least 1 or 2 more moves for their rotation. Now, I also believe that their bullpen essentially at least upgrading their bullpen might be saved, or might be done, for lack of better terms, with the signings of Andrew Kittredge back to the team, and then the signing of Ryan Helsley from the Mets to the Orioles, 2 years, $28 million. But the other thing that you have to know is that the Orioles still have a relatively not very expensive payroll, even with all those additions. When you factor in arbitration, they're still slightly under $200 million. So they have room to make one more big move. And I believe that they will make a very large signing in the free agency market in terms of starting pitching that will really kick things off after the fact. I believe, and I did write for this for Stadium Rant, I believe they will go for the largest fish in the pond in the pitching scene. That will be Framber Valdez. They do need another strong lefty pitcher. They do have Trevor Rogers, but they don't have a second lefty. My philosophy with any ball club is that you have two lefties on your starting rotation. Now, again,
you've got Povich. Cade Povich is at the back end as well.
Yes, Povich. If they don't get Framber Valdez, Cade Povich would be their next lefty to take over in a spot in the starting rotation. However, Cade Povich struggled in the majors, and then also had some issues with control in the minors. So you might not be very inclined to start him. You might want to give him a backseat role, maybe in the bullpen if you can. That might require signing Framber Valdez. That would likely put him at least maybe in the number 2 spot if you want to put a righty in the first spot, or maybe putting him in the 3rd spot to be right behind Trevor Rogers in the starting pitching 2 spot. But I believe that they will absolutely sign a pitcher, and that will likely be Valdez. If not Valdez, they will likely target Ranger Suarez if Valdez goes to another team, whether that be the Mets or the Giants. The other thing that you have to consider with the Orioles is that they are getting 2 pitchers back from injury from last year. Kyle Bradish, who was relatively good for the team back in 2023. And even a part of 2024. And you're also getting back Tyler Wells, who can give you some pretty good starts for here and there, and can also string together a couple of respectable starts for a period of time, especially down the stretch. So you are getting some pitching back, which is why I believe the Orioles will only get 1 pitcher, but it will be a very big pitcher. Then again, you also again have to consider the payroll, and by adding in, and I wrote on Stadium Rant, that AAV for that contract for Framber Valdez will likely be around the $30 million AAV ballpark. And once you put that in, that still gives you about a $230 million payroll after arbitration. So the Orioles are, again, in a really decent spot to bring in some really good players and still have at least maybe some room under the luxury tax threshold if they want to, or under a critical luxury tax threshold if they want to. So the Orioles, just to kind of sum it up, have been really surprising this year. Now, again, it wasn't really surprising to me with regards to just how bad their offense played and how bad their pitching was during the 2025 season, where you had a lot of injuries to key players. You didn't really have a great rotation, where essentially Dean Kremer was your ace on that team before Trevor Rogers came over and then stole the show. So this team could be really, really surprising in 2026. And if everything goes right for that team, if there's no critical injuries, if everybody plays up to their value, you'll likely see them possibly run for the AL East. If possible, they likely won't win it, but they'll likely get a wild card spot, and maybe there's a chance they have a deep playoff run in 2026. So hats off to the Orioles with a really, really strong free agency so far.
Yeah, I'm so excited. That lineup, once again, is power-packed in Baltimore. It's always had a power-packed lineup that's been kind of intimidating. They were just, shut down last year with injuries. But all the guys you mentioned, every one of them are all capable of 30-plus home runs per season. We didn't even talk about Tyler O'Neill, but he's got to fit into that lineup somewhere as well. So you're talking about top to bottom, that lineup, 25, 30 home runs for every guy in that Baltimore Orioles lineup. So the competition is really heating up already in the AL East. And it's only like, if you want to break the offseason into quarters, we're just past Q1 of the offseason, right? And each team is already remarkably improved in some areas, not every area. There's still areas of need, but there have been improvements made. So the team I was going to talk about are the Tampa Bay Rays. And I don't know if you remember, Jesse, but back in May of last year, the Rays were the best team in the AL East. They were on a serious hot streak last May. And then, of course, they cooled off, and they were subject to some serious injuries as well. But they have a young, star-studded lineup. Of course, front and center in that lineup is Junior Caminero, who is a bona fide superstar, right? 45 home runs last year, plays an elite third base, and over 100 RBIs. His numbers are just going to keep getting better and better. He's only, 23 years old? So,
well, actually, he's 21 years old, so he's really young.
Is he just 21? Oh, my God. Wow.
Yes.
So, the future is, or the ceiling is just limitless for this guy. Anyway, but they did have a to-do list, and I kind of brought that up here. Outfield offense is what they came up with. So they went out and they made an interesting move in acquiring Cedric Mullins. I picked up Cedric Mullins off the free agent market. Cedric Mullins is a proven left-handed bat. He's a veteran presence. He can provide leadership in the clubhouse. He could be a mentor to these young sluggers like Caminero. Having a guy like Mullins in the lineup will only benefit that Rays lineup, right? I mean, they are a very youthful team, and having a proven offensive and defensive sound player like Cedric Mullins is, can only benefit the lineup. So he'll go in as starting in center field. He'll be undoubtedly their starting center fielder. They haven't picked up anyone else as of yet, but that's okay because they've still got, Chandler Simpson will probably go into the lineup in the outfield as well. And having Mullins mentor him, I think will elevate his offense, Chandler Simpson, because he can really be a force, especially on the base paths. And if he had a little bit of power, if he added a little bit of power to his profile, he could be a potential all-star. Chandler Simpson could, because what a weapon to have offensively. Now they've also got Brandon Lowe and Josh Lowe, both of whom are capable of hitting 30 to 30 plus home runs per year. They've got Yandy Diaz in the lineup. He's strong offensively. And we talked about Caminero. Yeah. So the pitching, starting pitching is an area of need. They picked up reliable Steven Matz, who is a veteran. You can always throw him in and as a starter, right, at the back end of the rotation, if need be. Or if it proves that the starting rotation is balanced, you can put Matz in the bullpen and hopefully have at the front end Shane McClanahan, who, remember, he's only 28. Shane McClanahan, we think of him as like a veteran pitcher who was injured and has missed a couple of years, which he has, but he's still only 28. He's got plenty of great years ahead of him. And he, of course, has elite stuff. He's been the starter of the All-Star game before, right? So excellent ace pitcher, provided he's healthy, which it's looking like his rehab is going well, and he could be ready early in the season, maybe not an opening day, but by May or June, McClanahan will be at the front of that rotation. And then you've got Ryan Pepio, who is, dependable as well. He's a quality starter. He would be an ace on a lot of teams. And then there's Drew Rasmussen, also a reliable starter, and Shane Baz, who keeps getting better and better, who in his own right make a case for being an ace. And then if they don't want to go with Matz, again, they could have lefty Ian Seymour, who has proven that he's got excellent stuff, and he's kind of young as well. I think he's like 25 or 26. So a bit of a youth movement happening in the starting rotation with some veteran presence also. Now in the bullpen, it looks like they're going to lose Pete Fairbanks. I'm hoping the Blue Jays actually go after him just to really solidify the back end of that bullpen. That would be amazing, because it seems like all the really strong teams have at least two guys who could close. Like they have that one go-to guy, but then they got another guy who could close, who kind of serves in the setup role. And if they were to get Fairbanks, I think he could be that guy to serve as a setup man, or Hoffman could be more of a set-off man, and Fairbanks would be the closer. But at any rate, it doesn't look like Fairbanks is coming back to the Rays. So Griffin Jacks, who has closed before, would probably step into that role. So interesting profile for the Rays. I think already they look stronger than they were last year, and the Rays are always dangerous. With Kevin Cash at the helm, you know they're going to be in contention, and they've made their lineup stronger with a veteran presence. And if McClanahan comes back early in the year, you can't forget about the Rays, right? They're another team that very much needs to be taken seriously in that AL East. So there's my second team coverage there. Anything more to add on that, Jesse?
Yeah, really, just to kind of add two more things, to be honest with you. It's going to come down to, again, two players. Number one, I believe it will come down to the reemergence of Shane McClanahan in that rotation, because don't forget, he was out for pretty much entire 2025, recovering from, again, I believe it was another Tommy John surgery, like most pitchers do. And it really, you know, if you slide him in to that rotation and he performs just as good as he ever did, that becomes a very decent top five, or at least a top 15 rotation in the MLB, maybe a top 10 on a very good day or a very good stretch. So McClanahan is one to watch. And then again, as you mentioned, Chandler Simpson's development, very strong base runner, 44 stolen bases in 109 games. He is very fast, and he is very good at the plate hitting. 122 hits to 43 strikeouts. Now, if he does get his walk rate up and he is able to, you know, maybe develop a little bit more power, because he had no home runs in 109 games. That's the interesting thing. No home runs. So if he does develop a little bit more power, maybe he develops a little bit more of a walk rate, maybe a little bit more patience at the plate, he will be a perennial all-star for the Rays. So 2026 is a critical year for both guys. How well does McClanahan perform coming back to the rotation, and what's the leap from Chandler Simpson in 2026? Is it a small leap or is it a quantum leap? So those are two storylines to follow for that team.
Yeah, if it could be like a Kenny Lofton type leap, you know, 7 home runs, 10 home runs, get up around the 60 RBI range, and maybe move from that 9 slot into the leadoff slot. Man, this team has always been dangerous, but it's looking like it might be even more dangerous next year. So someone's got to finish last in the American League East. But each one of these teams is getting stronger and stronger. So interesting stuff. It's crazy. It's like there's more to talk about in December, you know, leading into Christmas, than there is, you know, during like the dog days of August of the MLB season, it seems, right? So, yeah, strong dialogue tonight with Dirty Leather. I guess that's about it. Anything to add further? Any further points, Jesse? All right, so we'll wrap it up from there. Anything else?
To be honest with you, I don't think there's anything else to wrap up. I think the only thing that I can really think about is watch where Tatsuya Imai ends up. It might be very surprising to some folks. I have him going to the Cubs on a 6-year deal. That might be one to go, but that's a very fluid market. It's a really fluid market for him.
Yeah, and I really can't make any predictions. I'm not even going to take any wild guesses on who signs next. But, you know, I'm always listening to MLB Network and trying to get the scoops. I don't have any read on Tucker. I truly don't. And I don't have any read on Bichette. I wish I could communicate some scoops that I've heard, but I'm really not leaning towards any team. But anyway, I'm sure we'll have more to report. This is likely our last Dirty Leather episode for 2025. So we will check in the new year. I hope everyone has an awesome holiday break. And for Jesse, this is Doug, Dirty Leather Crew, signing off. Bye for now.
Take care, everyone.